In the verdant rolling hills of central Virginia, during the spring of 1834, a discovery was unearthed that would reverberate through history, exposing the depths to which human depravity could sink. Beneath the unassuming facade of a modest farmhouse in Henrico County, a horrific secret lay hidden. 47 children, ranging in age from 6 to 16, were found chained in a basement, their lives reduced to unimaginable torment. These children, diverse in appearance and speaking a cacophony of languages, shared only one commonality: a whispered name spoken through tears: Mother Sullivan. The Henrico County Archives, long buried in dust and obscurity, preserved a sheriff's report so harrowing that it drove 3 seasoned officers to abandon their posts within days of the discovery. What makes this case not merely a footnote in history, but a haunting specter, is not just the grotesque cruelty uncovered, but the chilling realization that Constance Sullivan, the architect of this nightmare, had orchestrated her monstrous enterprise for over 2 decades, undetected in the heart of a tight-knit rural community. Before delving deeper into the twisted saga of the Sullivan family and the unspeakable secrets they harbored, let us pause to reflect on the courage it takes to confront such darkness. This tale is not for the faint of heart. It is for those rare souls who dare to peer into the abyss of human history, unafraid to face truths that unsettle the soul. If you feel compelled to explore these grim chapters alongside others who seek to understand the shadows of the past, I invite you to join our community of truth seekers. Share in the comments. From which state are you listening? Are you prepared to uncover stories of horror that may lurk closer to home than you imagine? The question that confounded investigators in 1834 and continues to perplex historians today is how such a vast and sinister operation could have flourished unnoticed in the small interconnected community of Millbrook, Virginia. In the early 19th century, Virginia was a land caught in a delicate balance between tradition and transformation. The plantation system, with its sprawling estates and reliance on enslaved labor, still dominated the social and economic landscape. Yet whispers of industrial progress were beginning to drift southward from the north. Millbrook, a modest settlement of roughly 50 families scattered across the gentle slopes of Henrico County, epitomized the quintessential American rural community of the era. Its residents toiled in fields of tobacco and corn, bartered goods at Henderson's General Store, and gathered for communal events in a one-room schoolhouse that doubled as a meeting hall. Life in Millbrook was predictable, bound by the rhythms of the seasons and the shared values of a God-fearing community. On the outskirts of this pastoral idyll stood the Sullivan property, a seemingly unremarkable farmstead that blended seamlessly to the landscape. The farmhouse, a 2-story structure built in the Federal style popular in the 1810s, boasted white clapboard siding and a wraparound porch, its architecture mirroring the simplicity and elegance of Virginia's rural homes. A red barn loomed 60 yards behind the house, flanked by a chicken coop and a smokehouse, completing the picture of a typical agrarian estate. To any weary traveler passing along the dusty road connecting Millbrook to Richmond, the Sullivan farm appeared as ordinary as any other, perhaps even a touch more prosperous, given its 200 acres of fertile land. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy lay a secret so grotesque it would shatter the community's illusions of safety and trust. Ezra Sullivan, who had purchased the land in 1809 with an inheritance from his father's tobacco fortune, was no ordinary farmer. Over the years, he had devoted considerable resources to expanding the farmhouse's basement, transforming it into something far more elaborate than the simple root cellars common in Virginia homes of the period. This subterranean labyrinth extended well beyond the house's footprint, a sprawling network of chambers meticulously designed for a purpose no one outside the Sullivan family could have imagined. Local craftsmen, hired sporadically throughout the 1810s and 1820s to assist with excavation and construction, recalled Ezra's peculiar instructions. He paid generously, always in cash, and insisted that workers focus solely on their assigned tasks, never revealing the full scope of the project. These fragmented efforts ensured that no single laborer ever grasped the true nature of the underground complex they were helping to create. Constance Sullivan, Ezra's wife, arrived in Millbrook in 1811 as a young bride of 22. To the community, she was a figure of quiet dignity. A handsome woman with dark hair, a soft voice, and a penchant for simple, neat attire. She attended Methodist church services when her health allowed and cultivated a reputation for charity, often speaking of her and Ezra's efforts to care for orphaned children from her family in Pennsylvania. Her explanations were always plausible. The children were temporary wards, awaiting placement with suitable families. This narrative satisfied the curiosity of neighbors who occasionally glimpsed young faces on the Sullivan property or noticed the couple's wagon loaded with supplies. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store alongside her husband Thomas, would sometimes see a child peering from the wagon during Constance's visits to town. When questioned, Constance would gently explain that the children were shy, traumatized by the loss of their parents, and needed time to adjust. In an era marked by high mortality rates and frequent orphanhood, such explanations were accepted without scrutiny. Thomas Henderson himself noted that Constance was among his most reliable customers, arriving every 2 weeks with a detailed list and ample cash to purchase large quantities of staples: flour, cornmeal, salt pork, molasses, and basic medicines. The volume of her purchases raised occasional eyebrows, as they seemed excessive for a supposedly childless couple. Yet Constance's ready explanation about the orphaned children quelled any suspicions. She also bought unusual amounts of medical supplies, attributing them to the ailments common among children from impoverished backgrounds. The community, accustomed to tales of hardship, saw no reason to question her further. The Sullivan farm operated on a rhythm that subtly deviated from the norms of Millbrook's farming families. While most households adhered to the sun's cycle, rising at dawn and resting at dusk, activity at the Sullivan property often persisted late into the night. Flickering lights illuminated the farmhouse windows at odd hours, and the distant sound of hammering or construction occasionally drifted across the fields. When neighbors inquired, Ezra would dismiss their curiosity with talk of ongoing improvements to accommodate the growing number of children in their care. These explanations, delivered with the calm assurance of a man confident in his standing, were enough to satisfy a community that valued privacy and respected the Sullivans' apparent benevolence. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, the itinerant physician, who served Millbrook and its surrounding areas, was among those unwittingly drawn into the Sullivans' web of deception. Called to the farm several times during the 1820s and early 1830s, he was told that one of the orphaned children required medical attention. Yet, he was never permitted to examine the children directly. Constance would describe their symptoms in detail, requesting specific medications while explaining that the children were too traumatized to be seen by strangers. Dr. Whitfield, bound by the medical ethics of the time and trusting Constance's account, complied without pressing further. Similarly, Reverend Samuel Matthews, the local pastor, was charmed by the Sullivans' apparent piety. During his occasional visits, he praised their Christian compassion, offering to assist in finding permanent homes for the orphans. Constance always demurred, claiming she was already in contact with relatives in Pennsylvania, who would soon take the children. Her assurances, delivered with quiet conviction, left no room for doubt. What the residents of Millbrook could not have known was that Constance Sullivan had perfected a deception so intricate it rivaled the most cunning criminal enterprises. The children she claimed to shelter were not temporary wards awaiting loving homes. They were prisoners, purchased, kidnapped, or lured from families across multiple states, subjected to conditions so horrific they defied comprehension. For over 2 decades, Constance had operated this clandestine prison beneath the noses of her neighbors, exploiting their trust and the era's social norms to shield her crimes. The unraveling of this nightmare began with a series of seemingly unconnected events in the early months of 1834, a winter marked by brutal cold that gripped Virginia in a relentless freeze. On February 23rd, a traveling merchant named Jacob Stern, caught in a violent snowstorm while journeying from Richmond to Charlottesville, sought refuge at the Sullivan farm, the nearest shelter visible from the snow-choked road. Ezra, though visibly reluctant, could not refuse hospitality in such perilous conditions. Stern later described the evening as fraught with unease. Constance served a sparse meal of cornbread and salt pork, but the atmosphere was tense, with the Sullivans exchanging nervous glances and starting at every sound. When Stern inquired about the children he had heard resided on the farm, Constance explained they were sleeping, recovering from a recent fever. What unnerved him most, however, was a sound he heard throughout the night as he lay on a makeshift bed in the parlor, a faint, muffled crying emanating from beneath the floorboards. When he mentioned it to Ezra the next morning, Sullivan dismissed. "It is wind whistling through the foundation, a common occurrence in old houses during winter." Though skeptical, Stern accepted the explanation, but the Sullivans' demeanor left him uneasy as he departed. 3 weeks later, on March 15th, another incident deepened the mystery. Mary Catherine Flynn, a young Irish immigrant traveling with her family to find work in Richmond's tobacco fields, became separated from her group during a treacherous river crossing. Exhausted and frightened, she stumbled upon the Sullivan farm as night fell. Constance took her in, offering food and shelter. Mary Catherine was never seen alive again. When her family reported her disappearance to the Richmond sheriff, they provided details of her last known whereabouts, prompting a search of the surrounding wilderness. The vast, untamed landscape of Virginia made the effort futile, and after a week the search was abandoned, with Mary Catherine presumed lost to exposure or predators. The final catalyst came on April 2, 1834, when William Hutchinson, a local farmer, was hunting rabbits in the woods bordering the Sullivan property. A sound stopped him in his tracks, not the playful cries of children, but desperate, blood-curdling screams of terror. Creeping closer, hidden among a stand of oak trees 50 yards from the farmhouse, Hutchinson listened for nearly an hour as the screams continued, unmistakably emanating from beneath the house. He saw Ezra emerge from a cellar door, glance around nervously, and disappear back underground. Deeply disturbed, Hutchinson shared his observations with neighbors, sparking a mix of reactions. Some speculated that the Sullivans' orphaned children might be troubled, requiring discipline or medical care that could explain the distressing sounds. Others, however, began to piece together oddities they had overlooked. Constance's excessive purchases, the nocturnal noises, the absence of the supposed orphans at community events. Sheriff Benjamin Crawford, a seasoned lawman with 15 years of service in Henrico County, initially dismissed the concerns as idle gossip. But when Hutchinson insisted on filing a formal complaint, Crawford's sense of duty compelled him to investigate. On the morning of April 8, 1834, he and his deputy, Marcus Webb, rode to the Sullivan farm, expecting a routine inspection to kill the rumors. Constance greeted them with her characteristic calm, inviting them in for coffee and expressing dismay at the community's gossip. She reiterated her story of the orphaned children, producing letters purportedly from Pennsylvania, relatives, and promising to arrange a meeting once the children recovered from their illness. The conversation was cordial until Webb, stepping outside to use the privy, noticed something chilling. The cellar door was secured with 3 heavy padlocks and chains, its wood scarred with desperate claw marks, as if someone had tried to escape. From within, when Webb alerted Crawford, the sheriff's demeanor shifted. He politely but firmly requested to see the cellar, citing the need to dispel the rumors. Constance's composure shattered. Her face paled, her hands trembled, and she stammered excuses about the cellar's danger and the children's restricted access. Then, from beneath the kitchen floor, came a sound that froze the officers. Blood. The unmistakable cries of children followed by a weak plea for help. The discovery that followed would haunt Crawford and Webb for the rest of their lives. Forcing open the cellar door, they were assaulted by a stench so overpowering it nearly drove them back. A nauseating blend of human waste, unwashed bodies, and what Crawford later described as the smell of despair itself. The basement, a sprawling warren of stone-walled chambers designed to muffle sound, was a monument to calculated cruelty. The main chamber, directly beneath the kitchen, housed most of the 47 children, each shackled to iron rings embedded in the walls. Their chains allowed limited movement, but ensured no possibility of escape. Emaciated, clad in rags, and bearing the marks of prolonged neglect and abuse, the children ranged from 6 to 16 years old. Many suffered from fever, respiratory ailments, and skin conditions born of their damp, unventilated prison. Yet it was their silence that struck the officers most profoundly. After their initial cries, the children fell quiet, staring at their would-be rescuers with eyes devoid of hope, as if rescue were an alien concept. Deputy Webb, a father of 4, was overcome, retreating twice to vomit. Crawford, despite his years of experience, struggled to comprehend the scale of the horror. The basement's smaller chambers revealed the chilling efficiency of the Sullivan system. One room contained stocks and restraining devices for punishment. Another a crude medical area where children were treated not out of compassion, but to prolong their utility. A third chamber held meticulous records, names, ages, arrival dates, and notes on each child's condition and behavior. These ledgers exposed the operation's scope. Since 1812, over 90 children had passed through the basement, acquired through purchase from poorhouses, kidnapping, or luring runaways with false promises. The most horrific discovery lay in a narrow passage, accessible only by crawling, a chamber containing the remains of at least 36 children, buried in shallow graves beneath the floor, their bodies covered with lime to mask the odor of decay. Some had succumbed to illness or malnutrition. Others bore signs of violent death. The investigation that followed stretched over months, as authorities grappled with the enormity of the Sullivan operation and its implications. Constance Sullivan's genius lay in her ability to exploit the community's trust and the era's social dynamics. Her persona as a charitable woman caring for orphans aligned perfectly with Millbrook's Christian values, deflecting suspicion. The children were conditioned to call her mother, ensuring that any overheard cries would seem familial. Their absence from public view was explained as shyness or trauma, and their supposed eventual placement with relatives accounted for their permanent presence. The basement's soundproof construction and the fragmented nature of its building process ensured that no single worker understood its purpose. Even the children's psychological conditioning, convincing them they were abandoned and worthless, ensured their compliance, with older captives given minor privileges to enforce control over younger ones. The community's reaction was one of stunned disbelief. Many refused to accept that Constant, a fixture of Millbrook for over 20 years, could be capable of such atrocities. Some posited that Ezra had coerced her, or that the situation was a misunderstanding. These defenses crumbled as evidence mounted. The basement records revealed Constance's correspondence with a network of traffickers across 5 states, discussing merchandise in coded language that clearly referred to children. One letter from a Morrison in Philadelphia, dated January 1834, described 6 children available for purchase, complete with notes on their temperaments and training needs. Financial records showed payments of $50 to $200 per child, with the Sullivan farm serving as both a holding facility and a distribution hub. Over 2 decades, Constant had amassed over $8,000, hundreds of thousands in modern terms, through this trade. Dr. Whitfield's testimony exposed Constance's chilling medical acumen. Her precise requests for medications and sedatives suggested she had studied how to sustain large numbers of children in extreme deprivation. Thomas Henderson's sales records corroborated the operation's growth, with Constance's purchases of food, clothing, and medical supplies escalating over time. Ezra's role as the enforcer emerged through survivor accounts, describing his brutal punishments and maintenance of the basement's infrastructure. The investigation expanded as authorities uncovered the Sullivan operation's place within a broader trafficking network. Rebecca, a 14-year-old survivor who had been kidnapped from Pennsylvania in 1829, proved instrumental. Her extraordinary memory and defiance allowed her to recall overheard conversations, naming contacts, and describing shipments of children to other facilities. Her testimony led to the discovery of a letter from Henry Blackwood, a Charleston plantation owner, specifying requirements for children he wished to purchase. This opened a new dimension. Southern elites were using the network to acquire children for purposes far beyond labor. Medical experiments, violent entertainment, and worse. Raids across the South, coordinated by federal marshals, rescued over 100 additional children and exposed a network spanning decades and involving hundreds of victims. Blackwood's plantation revealed a hidden, experimental quarters where children were subjected to horrific medical tests, their suffering documented in meticulous records. The case faced resistance from powerful figures, with witnesses intimidated and Constant found dead in her cell under suspicious circumstances. Yet the testimony of Samuel Pierce, a former Blackwood overseer, provided undeniable evidence, leading to arrests and reforms that reshaped child welfare laws and federal authority over interstate crimes. The Sullivan case left an indelible mark on American history, exposing the vulnerability of children and the complicity of communities blind to evil in their midst. The farm was demolished, its basement sealed, and a cemetery established for the unknown victims. The courage of individuals like Hutchinson, Crawford, and Rebecca ensured that this horror was brought to light, reminding us that vigilance and compassion are vital in protecting the defenseless. If this tale has stirred you, share it with those who seek to uncover the dark truths of the past, and join us in exploring what other secrets lie buried in America's history. What are your thoughts? Do you believe the full truth was uncovered? Or do shadows still linger in the Virginia hills? Share below, and let us continue this journey into the darkness together.